Welcome back to the report. Now let's turn to the Conservative Party. Like the opposition, they're embroiled in an internal conflict as they decide their leader following the resignation of Prime Minister David Cameron. Nominations closed this week for the candidates to step forward. Several names, including Home Secretary Theresa May and the relatively new Work and Pensions Secretary Stephen Crabb, appear to be in the running. But the main candidate, although he's not yet officially declared, is the former Mayor of London and prominent Leave campaigner Boris Johnson. So, is a victory for Johnson inevitable, or has the animosity of the referendum campaign made his path to the leadership more difficult? Nathaniel Amos-Sansom has this report.
Following the sudden departure of David Cameron last Friday morning, the Conservative Party will now hold its first leadership election in 11 years, and its first to be held while in government since the 1990s. With Brexit negotiations stalled and an early general election potentially on the horizon, the party's backbench 1922 committee has set in train an accelerated timetable, with nominations closing this week and the winner to be announced in early September of this year. Candidates for the leadership need only 2 nominations from fellow MPs to make the first ballot. After successive ballots of Conservative members of Parliament, the final 2 candidates will be put to a vote of the party's grassroots membership. While he hasn't yet made a formal announcement, the former Mayor of London and prominent Leave campaigner Boris Johnson is thought to be the frontrunner in the race. He is set to have the backing of Justice Secretary and Leave co-campaigner Michael Gove, as well as the vast majority of Conservative MPs who supported a Leave vote, with the Chancellor George Osborne, for a long time considered the frontrunner in the race, publicly ruling himself out following the result of the EU referendum. Numerous other candidates from the Remain side have begun lining up as part of a so-called Stop Boris campaign. The Home Secretary Theresa May, who supported a Remain vote in the referendum but kept a low profile during the campaign, is said to be the favourite to go head-to-head with Boris in the final round. The new Work and Pensions Secretary, Stephen Crabb, announced his candidacy today, along with his main backer, the Business Secretary, Sajid Javid. The Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, and the Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, all of whom supported a Remain vote, are also expected to throw their hats into the ring. The leadership election takes place against a backdrop of deep bitterness, as well as fears that a more intolerant atmosphere is prevailing in the UK. In recent days, a Facebook page called Boris for PM has courted controversy online, with many of its posts being accused of being racist in nature. The page, which styles itself as a grassroots effort and is not affiliated in any way to Johnson's campaign, posted an image last night questioning whether a Muslim chancellor such as Sajid Javid would be fit for the job. While this page may not reflect the views of the candidate it is supporting, the fallout from the EU referendum could ensure that the race to succeed David Cameron may be as bitter and divided as the party appeared to be during the referendum. Nathaniel Amos-Sansom, The Report.
Well, joining me to discuss this is political commentator Charlotte Chase of the Bow Group. Charlotte, welcome to the programme. Let's talk a little bit about the people who are probably not going to be the next leader of the Tory party. Why is it that people like Stephen Crabb, or perhaps even more absurdly, Jeremy Hunt, have put their names forward? I mean, Jeremy Hunt must be one of the most unpopular politicians in the country. What are they doing?
I think there's a call from grassroots Conservatives to see a change from the establishment elected, well-recognised names. And it's only by figures such as Stephen Crabb and Jeremy Hunt throwing their names into the ring that enable the leadership debate to be opened up. This is vital to the kind of Conservative leadership election being more democratic and representing the views of the grassroots supporters. And so I think it's very important. While they may not be the ideal candidate, they're putting themselves into the ring as a possibility. The process is almost important in itself. Okay.
Well, perhaps it indicates a certain lack of self-awareness on Jeremy Hunt's part that he's put his name forward. But all right, so these people get eliminated. Who do you think are the 2 people, because as I understand it, that's the case, isn't there? There are then 2 people selected by a ballot of MPs that go forward and are the candidates that are offered to the wider membership of the Conservative Party?
I think I'd like to possibly firstly, before I would answer your question, just recognise my disappointment with the chosen method of the 1922 committee for the election. It allows a great deal of control by the MPs in Parliament, and I think we've seen through the EU referendum in particular a huge dichotomy between the views of grassroots campaigners and parliamentary conservatives. On that note, with the campaign being very short run, the decision coming before the conference rather than as the established pattern had been, campaigning during the conference with a result at the end, it gives a huge advantage to the establishment candidate. And on that basis, if the current election method stands as has been chosen by the 1922 committee, I would predict that Boris Johnson and Theresa May will be the final two candidates to be on the ballot paper.
So you sound as if you think the current setup or the way it's been chosen at the moment is a bit of a fix.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily use the word fix. I think it's disappointing, the methods that have been chosen. It doesn't allow for a great deal of grassroots involvement, and this has a tendency to not allow a candidate with a true conservative ideology to come forward. The Bow Group have done a poll recently whereby 52% of people actually voted in favour of potential leadership partnership for Andrew Leadsom and Liam Fox, or either one of those candidates holding high positions within the Conservative Party. I think that under the system, it's unlikely such candidates with lesser profiles and less of a presence within Parliament are going to be able to collect the number of votes by parliamentary Conservatives in order to be able to get themselves onto the public ballot, where they may actually, in fact, be more popular. OK, so say that it is Boris Johnson and Theresa May. You're suggesting that. Many commentators are suggesting that. Is there any real ideological difference to be had here? I mean, they were on different sides of the EU campaign, but they're both sort of pretty right-wing Conservatives, aren't they? I would, to an extent, argue that Boris Johnson is a more staunch right-wing Conservative. Theresa May has presented a slightly more liberal idea of conservatism that moves away from the traditional Conservative ideology that the Bow Group would like to see return to Conservative politics.
Spell that out for us then, because, I mean, for a lot of viewers of this programme, this is the woman that pushed through Prevent, is extending the surveillance powers. Doesn't look like that liberal a Conservative.
I think it is, to somewhat of a degree, obviously her representation of the Remain campaign. While she was a quiet supporter of the campaign, she was still a Remain representative. But also she has voted in favour of many liberal policies and voted to have a greater extension of liberal ideas within the party than, say, Boris Johnson would have liked to have seen, or other candidates, maybe Andrew Leadsom, would have liked to have seen.
So on Boris Johnson's prospects, I mean, the Leave campaign won, but you couldn't say it really enhanced Boris Johnson's stature during the campaign, and neither has his response to the victory. I mean, put bluntly, he looks incompetent, and he looks like somebody who caused a fight for his own personal ambition and didn't have a clue what to do with it when he won.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think Boris Johnson would be more than capable of having the leadership and being in charge of the Conservative Party. I think that is different then from representing the views of grassroots candidates. He's obviously acted as London Mayor very successfully, and I think he would, on election, carry that through into the Tory party leadership. However, I don't think that's the direction that the Conservative Party needs to be going in, or that the public and supporters of the Conservative Party want to see it going in.
So, last question, Charlotte. Obviously, you've got your own preference, but looking at it objectively, who do you think actually would win in a runoff between Theresa May and Boris Johnson?
I think that's very difficult to say at this point. Unfortunately, with the setup of the election the way it is, it's not allowing candidates much time to assert their policy views. It's given this huge advantage to the establishment candidate. with no real time to deliberate on policy preferences and what they would do with the leadership and ultimately the prime ministership. Therefore, it's very difficult to say. I think on possibly the current polls are saying that Theresa May have a slight advantage over Boris Johnson at this time, but it's all very, very close to call at this point.
OK. Charlotte Chase from the Bow Group, thanks very much for joining us. No doubt we'll be returning to this story many times over the coming days, but that's all we've got.